Yesterday, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei of Iran was assassinated in what is being described in Western media as a joint airstrike operation. Even though the Israeli Air Force carried out airstrikes in and around Tehran, it is clear that these were supported by the US military. As such, the US is complicit in the murder of the head of state of a sovereign nation. And this unilateral military action once again proved both that the United Nations Charter has lost its value and that the UN Security Council is now broken. In his opening remarks to the Security Council at last night's meeting, Secretary General Antonio Guterres condemned the military strikes by the US and Israel, while also condemning the Iranian response, citing Article 2 of the UN Charter. All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. The enormous and ongoing military strikes against Iran were clearly in breach of that article. In its response to the Security Council, Iran's representative cited Article 51 of the UN Charter, which states that nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right of individuals or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations, until the Security Council has taken measures necessary to maintain international peace and security. Article 51 is one of only two exceptions to the general prohibition on the use of force by UN members set out in Article 2. The strikes were all the more cynical for taking place partway through talks moderated by the government of Oman. Indeed, Guterres hinted at this in his remarks, saying, "The US and Israeli attacks occurred following the third round of indirect talks between the US and Iran, mediated by Oman. Preparations had been made for technical talks in Vienna next week, followed by a new round of political talks. I deeply regret that this opportunity of diplomacy has been squandered." Pakistan's representative at the Security Council was more blunt, saying that diplomacy has once again been derailed as these attacks have happened right in the middle of negotiations. Indeed, the strikes confirmed that the UN Security Council has become completely unable to take measures necessary to maintain international peace and security, as required by Article 51. On the 80th anniversary of the founding of the UN last year, Secretary General Guterres warned that the fragile legitimacy of the Security Council could endanger global peace if it remains gridlocked and fails to fulfill its primary purpose. All of the Western nations around the UN Security Council table last night showed themselves to be weak and silent in the face of America's military aggression. As one, they criticized Iran's unprovoked attacks on Gulf states as Iranian ballistic missiles targeted US military sites in Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Kuwait, while also targeting Israel. Self-evidently, Iran was targeting US military installations in all of those countries. And indeed, the US Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain was struck by at least one ballistic missile. Yet, civilian sites also got hit, including in the UAE and in Bahrain. However, there was no mention at all of the US and Israeli strikes on Iran in the statements of Western nations at the Security Council last night, as if they feared US reprisals if they spoke out. Not a single word from the French, the Latvians, the Danes, the Greeks, even the Bahrainis. Only that Iran murdered its citizens and should not be allowed to acquire a nuclear bomb. In the end, the acting UK permanent representative, James Kariuki, who I can tell you from personal experience is the most arrogant and puffed up British diplomat that I ever met, said that Iran must refrain from further strikes and its appalling behaviour to allow a path back to diplomacy. The sitting president of the UN Security Council, the United Kingdom, the US takes over the presidency today, did not utter a single word about the USA or Israel. No attempt, as a country convening the meeting, to seek common ground and some agreement on de-escalation and the way forward. Britain's approach was merely to blame Iran for being attacked, in what the Russian Federation representative described in his intervention as victim blaming. I already knew that Britain had given up diplomacy in 2014, but this appeared yet another nail in a coffin which the UK refuses to bury, as it pretends to be a nation of diplomacy when it is not. Britain is now a nation of warmongers, yet without the troops to fight its own battles. While final confirmation of the fact had yet to be provided at that time, The Prime Minister of Israel and President Trump are already celebrating the possible killing of Khamenei. The dictator is gone, Netanyahu crowed in his social media statement. President Trump called on Iranian people to rise up and take over their country. Yet within hours, sources within the CIA were already leaking reports that Khamenei may simply be replaced by IRGC hardliners. As I have pointed out before, rather than fomenting revolution, unilateral military action against Iran may have the opposite effect and mobilize Iranian resistance. This idea was stated with great clarity by Professor Robert Popp of Chicago University, who said, with each passing day of regime targeting airstrikes, we lose control over the political dynamics they unleash. It becomes less about individual leaders and more about national survival, less about dissent and more about resistance. Imagine if a foreign power struck Washington and called on Americans to overthrow their government. Would citizens rally against their leaders or against the foreign attacker? I will interview Professor Popp later today, so please look out for that video. Iran is a country of 92 million people with an army of over 610,000 personnel. It is a tightly controlled state, and as we saw in January, is more than capable and ready to stifle internal dissent, including through violent means. It also does not have an oven-ready opposition lined up in the wings that can walk in unopposed and miraculously take over the country. To suggest that it does takes us into Bay of Pigs territory, but somehow more idiotic. Having already kidnapped the head of state of one sovereign nation earlier this year, the United States of America has now murdered another, Ayatollah Khamenei. This will unleash asymmetric threats against the US and all of its allies that Trump may not be able to control. If this military action drags out inconclusively, and I predict that it will, then the midterms may prove catastrophic for Trump. Iran has already declared this action a declaration of war. I predict that the Iranian regime may very well outlast Donald Trump's. Right now, the world is full of warmongers, and you see this through the absolutely rabid statements in the British mainstream media and on X over the past 24 hours. We need peacemongers more than ever before. If you want to be a peacemonger, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I really need all of your help. The world right now needs peace more than it ever has. Thank you for listening.